Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Fatima Bhutto's new novel, The Runaways, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. It was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until, after over 93 years, the Strand is a sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Whiting. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors like Fatima and Susan, we wouldn't be here today, and we so appreciate it. So, tonight we are excited to have with us, once again, Fatima Bhutto to celebrate the launch of her new novel, The Runaways. Fatima was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and grew up between Syria and Pakistan. She's the author of 5 previous books of fiction and nonfiction. Her debut novel, The Shadow of the Crescent Moon, was longlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction, and the memoir about her father's life and assassination, Songs of Blood and Sword, was published to acclaim. Her most recent book is The Runaways. She graduated from Barnard with a degree in Middle Eastern languages and cultures and has a master's in South Asian government and politics from SOAS. Joining Fatima in conversation is writer Susan Abulhawa. Susan is a novelist, poet, essayist, scientist, mother, and activist. Her debut novel, Mornings in Jenin, translated into 30 languages, is considered a classic in Anglophile Palestinian literature. Her second novel, The Blue Between Sky and Water, was likewise an international bestseller. Susan is also the founder of Playgrounds for Palestine, a children's organization dedicated to uplifting Palestinian children, and she is the co-chair of Palestine Writes, the first North American Palestinian Literature Festival. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Fatima and Susan to the stage.
Hi, welcome everyone. And thank you for that intro, Sabir. It is my honor to host this book discussion with the brilliant Fatima Bhutto on the occasion of the launch of The Runaways, a brilliant and brave novel that I loved. So first, Fatima, congratulations, Alf Mabruk on your pub day. And I just want to tell you that I found this story captivating. I found it engaging, provocative, thought-provoking, and heart-stirring. And for the audience, just a one-line overview. This is the story of several young people who, from various different socioeconomic backgrounds, geographic backgrounds, familial backgrounds, whose lives intersect in a training camp in Mosul in Iraq. So I think a good place to start, Fatima, would be if you could tell the audience in your own words a little bit more about the novel.
Thank you, Susie, for that very, very generous introduction, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. We can't see you, but we assume you're here. The Runaways is a difficult novel to describe because it is ostensibly about radicalism, and it's ostensibly about why young people would choose to take up arms against the world, and why in doing so they would fight not only a kind of unknowable other or opponent, but their families, their cities, their countries, their friends, and their lives as they know it. But at the same time as all that's true, it's really a novel for me about alienation. And it's a novel about what it means to be isolated in the world and to not feel you have a place, you have a future, or a voice. And I think all those things are possible without radicalism, without extreme violence at the other end. but I'm not sure you can have extreme violence without that level of alienation. So it's also about the inner lives of young people that I feel we haven't really looked at, whether in literature or in current affairs or in the news, or even just in our own imagination. When we talk about things like the war on terror, when we talk about things like radicalism, and why it is that people would give up everything to fight a war really against the world.
Yeah, and I've told you this before. I think it was really brave. I feel like you were brave to kind of take this on, and I kept thinking that as I was reading, because it's a hard topic. It's really it's hard to I imagine it is. It would be for me to kind of capture the impetus someone could feel or experience to do something so drastic. But we know it happened, and yes, everyone, they were all nameless people and cartoon characters. So this kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what was the impulse for you? What was the motivation to tackle this? Because I imagine it took some courage.
Well, I mean, it did, but you know that more than anyone, Susie. I mean, you know that when you're dealing with fiction, you have to be so much braver than you are anywhere else, because it contains the space for bravery. And so it's a shame not to use it. And I think there are certain things that are so frightening and so uncomfortable that you can only really deal with them in fiction. And obviously for people listening who don't know this, Susie has a book coming out next week, which is incredibly brave. And everything you said, it must have been very difficult to write against the loveless world because of what it tackles. But in a strange sense, fiction, I always think of fiction as a Trojan horse. You can pack it with all kind of explosive, dangerous ideas. And people don't really see it coming. They might, if you were doing a nonfiction book or a newspaper article, they just think, oh, look, there's a horse. and by the time they've let the horse in, it's invaded the city. And so for me, the impetus really was a few things. It was, I was in college in New York when 9/11 happened. And I was, 19 years old. And so I was just really entering my 20s when the war on terror began. And so I really lived pretty much my adult life under this really awful gaze. Oh, we have a doggy.
They were so good before. I'm sorry, but yeah.
They just want to see what's happening.
Yeah.
So I kind of lived my adult life under this really uncomfortable lens, which meant that anytime I went through an airport, or anytime I met a new person, or anytime I had to hand over ID or spell my name or say my name, I made people uncomfortable. And I never understood why I made them uncomfortable. And it's because the narrative at the time was that the world was in danger because of a people. And those people were Muslims, or they were brown people, or they were Asian people, or they were Arab people. And you just had to fit into one of those categories before you were taken aside and questioned. And in the beginning, I was like everyone else. I was young, and I was, it was new, and we were all confused and frightened. And then I started to become angry, and I started to feel wounded, and I started to feel humiliated. And at that point, I thought, no, there are other stories, and there is a universe within this that no one's looking at. And it bothered me for a long time, but it was really a friend of mine who said to me one day, just apropos of nothing, oh, you should write about these people for your, in your next book. Why don't you write about these young kids who are running away from home? And when I heard that idea, I said to my friend, like, oh, nobody wants to, no, that's too heavy. And then I thought, why? I mean, we're all living it. We've spent the last 20 years living it. And actually, I want to read about them. I want to know what drives a 20-year-old boy living in a suburb of England. And I don't see those stories anywhere. So that's really where it began. And then when I started writing, of course, I just fell into this kind of abyss of things that I didn't know. And I was horrified. I didn't know. And if I thought, if I don't know them, you know, where are people talking about this?
Yeah, no, I agree, because, you know, when I was reading this, another thought that kept recurring to me is that there is such a gap in literature with this. I mean, this is such an important, it has been such a an important part of our generation's lives in terms of you know, this endless war. And of course, you know, ISIS was the big boogeyman of the West for a long time, and yet no one else really delved into the components of that in the way that you have, which is why I think this book is really important, and it's beautiful.
Thank you.
So what, I mean, I imagine you had to do a lot of research. Yeah. Can you talk to us about that, and not just about the characters, but, you know, we're in a lot of different geographic areas, and you're crossing terrain. So I'm curious about all the levels of research that you did.
Well, that's a really good question, because I always find it interesting to know what research goes into fiction writing, because it's not the same as nonfiction. So there was one strand of research which was just like living, just having been through those airports and having been at the other end of those awful conversations. So I had a store of those things, you know. So a lot of conversations that some of the characters have are conversations I've had, or I've thought, or things I've wanted to say. But on the other hand, I did do this kind of deep dive into, at that time when I started writing in 2014, a lot of this stuff was still up on the internet. So there were like Reddit threads, they were like AMA Reddit threads done by ISIS fighters. They had Ask Me Anythings on Twitter. And you would, you know, go through these threads and it would just be the strangest stuff. For example, people would write to these men. There was this one who was a Dutch fighter. You know, he speaks Dutch, he speaks English, he's quite eloquent and well spoken. And he was used for a lot of propaganda. And he would do these Twitter threads and people would be like, what's it like? Like, don't you feel lonely? And he's like, no, you can get married. And they were like, but how will I find a wife? And so I thought it was all going to be, you know, what weapon do you use for this thing? And it wasn't. It was just like, what's the water like? Where do you get the food you miss? And that really threw me when I started doing the research. And I found that a lot of it was talking about like Skype connections and whether they missed their mothers, you know, and whether their families were afraid of them. Those are things I didn't expect to find. So in the research, there was obviously the kind of icky stuff, which was the propaganda videos, which are very high-tech, sophisticated, very modern pieces of content, because they know what works. They know if you have an explosion and you've got good sound and you've got good audio and you've got a bit of an effect, it's more thrilling. And then there was this very kind of humane and sad side of it, which was people just wondering where they would get their medicine from, and you know, how they would call their girlfriends. Or so that kind of divided me when I was doing the research. And it was easy to ignore the violence because we'd been inundated with it. Yeah. So, you know, you watch the news, you see these terrible videos, you know that it goes on. But I wasn't prepared for how sophisticated their violence was packaged. You know, it's a very modern messaging. It looks like a Hollywood action film. And I wasn't prepared for the kind of loneliness that seeped through everything else. And then at some point in the writing process, because it took me a few years to write this book, I tried to go back and find things. And by that point, it had been scrubbed off the internet. So a lot of that stuff's gone now. You can't find the Tumblr blog posts. You can still see the violence though, which is curious, but you can't find those AMA threads.
Interesting, yeah. Are any of your characters based off of personalities you encountered in that research?
No, I didn't actually, because before I even started the research, I had the idea of Sunny and Monty already. So the moment I knew I wanted to write about this, I already knew I wanted to put two boys who couldn't be further apart from each other and who couldn't like each other less on a journey. So I already pretty much knew what they were going to be like as people. And then all the other characters kind of grew up around them after the fact. So I didn't do that, but there were little things that I picked up. Really, just the loneliness, you know. Like this is a strange side fact, but there was a whole kind of hashtag about cats amongst ISIS fighters. I don't know if you ever came across this, but it's like hashtag cats of jihad, because like they don't like dogs, obviously, you know. But they would take pictures of cats, like with their Kalashnikovs and like with their grenades, and then like share them on their social media. So there was like a whole internet portal just about cats that ISIS fighters loved.
No idea.
And then on their way. So that was really weird. So like obviously I wanted to put cats in it for that reason. And I can't remember now whether I managed to get cats of jihad in there, but it was definitely.
You know, this is reminding me of you have a scene in there with puppies that was difficult.
Oh, that's real, by the way.
I know that. I mean, you referenced the American soldiers because I remember seeing that clip. I didn't know that about the ISIS fighters as well.
But the ISIS fighters weren't like killing or torturing the cats. They were just kind of cuddling them.
Oh yeah, no. But I'm talking about the puppies. That puppy scene. But, and the reason I noted that, and this actually pertains to a question I was going to ask you later, but it came up. So, you made sure to talk about to preface what they were doing. You weren't prefacing, but you did mention it, that the fighters were watching American soldiers who were throwing puppies. And that kind of, I mean, that video went viral and it was hideous. It was really horrible. And it made me wonder if you know, we have this, you and I both, and I think a lot of writers like us who are rooted in the East, but who write in Western languages. And so there's this kind of, at least for me, there's this kind of tension where sometimes, you know, there's this, when you're writing about subjects that sort of validate Western perceptions of us in some way, are you kind of aware of this Western gaze on you? And do you worry about like falling into Orientalist traps?
Yeah, I think you do. I think you're always aware of it because you don't want to do, I won't even say the job. You don't want to do the kind of trick that's been done on you again. And so I find that what you have to do is play a sleight of hand a lot of times. You know, so that scene was one of those occasions for me, because not to give anything away and obviously not to disturb anyone, but there was this very viral video of these American soldiers. And I think they were in Afghanistan or maybe they were in Iraq. I'm not sure, but they were.
I think it was Afghanistan, yeah.
I think it was Afghanistan. And, you know, it became a kind of, there were a set of these iconic videos, you know, the drone pilots laughing as they push buttons that are incinerating people, that are hitting a wedding party as they're traveling, that are treating life as dust. And so I had this scene in the Runaways where there are these people in the desert in Iraq who are trying to copy the violence that they've grown up watching, you know. And what I was trying to do, at least in that scene, is several things. On the one hand, the two boys you're following come across this scene and they're repulsed by it. And these are two boys who have thrown away their lives. They've run away from home to join this movement, but they've never considered what that might mean for them. They've never considered what they might have to do in the service of that movement. And so with these two young men who have these kind of romantic but very naive ideas of what the movement means, power, influence, a kingdom that they will control, that's really the first moment that they are repulsed by it. And even as they're repulsed by it, the violence itself is a kind of mimicry. It's a staging of violence. It's not original to the region. It's not innovated there. It's copied and it's copied and it's copied and it's copied for what? To look like someone you perceive to be more powerful than yourself. So I think you do always have to see that. But at the same time, you find yourself trapped in a lot of spaces because you're not what you're misperceived to be, but you are these complex things. And you are beholden to feelings of inferiority, of superiority, and those clash. And so I think as long as you're writing about the clash, then I think you avoid those tropes. At least that's how I think of it.
Yeah. So I want to apologize. For everybody watching, Fatima and I are both dog lovers, and we were going to have our dogs, be here for you. And my dogs were so calm, but now they're fighting. And I'm really sorry, Fatima.
I thought they were sort of.
They're not fighting. They're
yeah,
playing. I don't know if you can hear them, but
I thought they were rearranging. I thought they were rearranging their sort of.
I don't know. I don't even want to know what they're doing. But okay, so I'd like for people to hear some of the prose, because I feel like the prose was really beautiful, and this book is very character driven. Can you hear that? Oh God. All right, so I'm gonna mute so you can read, and I think you'll calm down, and then I'd like us to talk about the characters.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna wear my glasses because I'm now at the age where I have to do that. And I'm gonna read a section from the character called Anita Rose, and she's a young girl who lives in Karachi, my hometown. And this is her as a young girl. What's a prostitute's daughter like you doing with a fancy notebook like this? Mira taunted Anita Rose at school. Anita didn't answer her. She had learned a long time ago to ignore the girls who hounded her. Mira's mother was actually a prostitute. Anita had seen her standing in the window of their home, wearing only a choli, pressing her breasts against the metal bars and calling down to the men in rickshaws and scooters below. It was why Mira hated Anita, why she teased her and bullied her, because she knew Anita's mother never sold her body, even though the Josephs were infinitely poorer than her mother with the choli, standing at the window grills. Leave it, Anita said. She had filled 3 pages of her notebook already, selecting only the most precious words. She had even started watching the news, where she learned an entirely new vocabulary. Corruption, fraud, hypocrite, fundamentalist, Zionist. She could not afford to lose the notebook now. Conspiracy. She had learned that only yesterday. Mira's eyes flickered with doubt as Anita refused to relinquish the notebook, and Anita saw her panic in front of the other girls. If Anita defeated this one bully, the rest would see Mira for what she truly was, an empty threat diffused of all her power. Anita saw it, all that pride and anxiety in the way Mira's eyes swelled and then contracted. But before Anita understood that she would never have the chance to exact any kind of real retribution, the game was already so skewed against her. Mira sank her ragged fingernails into the veins of Anita's hands. Anita tried to release herself from Mira's grip, but Mira only dug in harder until her nails had left a scratching of demi-lunes burning into the back of Anita's hand. She had not let Mira see how much she'd hurt her. Anita wouldn't give those girls the pleasure of knowing how their cruelty had marked her. She walked back home from school with her head held high, as though she were carrying a book on the center of her crown. As she walked, stopping only to pet the stray dogs resting in the shade of the billowing banyan trees. Anita bit her lip to keep the tears from falling down her face. As soon as she opened the door of their single cement room, which Ezra had promised he would soon upgrade now that he was earning real money, Zenobia, her mother, wailed that they were out of matches. Not a stick anywhere in the house. Anita would have to go to their neighbor and ask to borrow some. Without speaking or setting down her heavy school bag, black like her uniform shoes, Anita walked to Osama Shah's home, holding her breath against the rubbish of rotting bones and innards from the butcher that lined the gully to his door. She was extra careful not to step in pools of fetid water, radioactive slicks of green and orange. And she massaged the bruised back of her hand in her palm, soothing her wounds, and knocked on the old man's gunmetal door. When Osama appeared at the door, Anita, her eyes glazing with the promise of tears, sniffled and asked for matches. He reached into the pocket of his fraying shalwar kameez, its mal collar unbuttoned at the neck, and handing his last box to Anita asked, "Who dares make a lion cry?" And Anita, no lion, began to weep. Salt, soap, paper, eggs, candles. There was no end to what her mother borrowed from the neighbor next door. "Baby," Zenobia would announce as soon as her daughter lay down to read, or having freshly washed her hair at the tap behind the mandi, was shaking it out to dry. "We need thread." Thread, chilies, dawai, pencils. Somehow the old man had everything. Anita would knock, Osama would answer, and Anita would ask, and he would grant. Soap, salt, paper. Anita would mumble her thanks, and Osama would, at most, nod. It was a routine rehearsed over the years. She was a child when she had first knocked on his door, and the routine had never broken. Until the day her red notebook was almost snatched away, and she appeared, rapping on the gunmetal door, close to tears. Who dares make a lion cry? When Anita stopped weeping, wiping her eyes on her cap sleeve, and accepted a cup of creamy chai, to which she added 3 Osama invited her to sit down on a charpai he had covered with round cushions and a faded maroon and black block-printed ajak. There were only 2 seats in the sitting room, crowded with dust and books, the charpai and a wooden chair, which Osama lowered himself into carefully. "Do you know about poetry?" Anita shook her head, careful to hide under her bottom her hand bearing the crescent moons of Mira's nails. "Do you want to learn?" Anita thought for a moment. She nodded. Yes, she did. She liked learning. He read her the lines of a poem he said was like a weapon, devastating and fatal. Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Osama recited it to Anita in both Urdu and English. "I know English," Anita said, somewhat proudly. She would write the line down in her red notebook later. It was filled with new words, translations, and now maybe even poetry. "Acha?" "Yes, I know it from the TV." Osama smiled. "Correct me then, if I make any mistakes, okay?" "Okay," Anita agreed. And as he read her the poem, he swore it was an exception. Those Goras didn't know anything about love and the tragedy of true intimacy, not like our poets did, not like Hafez and Ghalib and Faiz. Oh, Lal Salam, Comrade Faiz. However, this time a Gora poem was allowed because it was a poem of a lion for a lion, read by one. But Anita didn't understand most of the words. "I don't speak proper English," she admitted, shaking her head so that he would understand that this was a sad confession and that her earlier boast had not been a lie. "Well, I'll teach you," Osama promised. "Together we will shake your chains to the earth like dew. Together we will make sure no more such things fall upon you."
Thank you. I love that scene. And in fact, there were some of the most tender scenes in the book. I mean, for me, had to do with that friendship between
Yeah.
Anita Rose and Osama. It was, you know, he's a much older man. She's a kid. He's their neighbor. But it was a totally believable friendship, and yeah, I mean, he was a tangential, he was an ancillary, I mean, a minor character in the book, but he, you know, he won my heart for sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was just going to say he was the last character I came up with. So he
Really?
came to me totally at the end of the whole thing.
Oh, I'm so glad, because I loved him.
Me too. I loved him a lot, and he just appeared, you know, magically.
Yeah, and I was surprised to hear that, you know, the two characters that you started with were Monty and Sunny, because I felt like, you know, the characters of Anita Rose and Layla were very well developed. So maybe can you tell us how the character, especially of Anita Rose, came about, and also if you can touch a little bit on their transformation, because I feel like that was something you did so brilliantly in this book, was to show, you know, how these characters who really start in this place of innocence, and then end up in this really, really very dark world. But you did it really well, and it was totally believable.
You know, in a way, it happened naturally, and in a way I had to really suffer through it before I got to the natural part. So there's Monty and Sunny, who are the two boys, and Anita, Rose, and Layla, and then these kind of ancillary characters, as you said, like Osama, who's this old Marxist who lives nearby in this crowded area that Anita, Rose, and her family live. And there's also the story of Sunny's father, Suleiman Jamil, who migrates from India to England, to Portsmouth. And in a way, it was not possible to know who Sunny was without knowing who his father was. But at the same time, it must have been my fourth or fifth draft of this book before I realized that. So the early versions of the Runaways were very much set in the present, and they were all forward momentum. Tomorrow. And at some point I realized, or I was made to realize, that we had to know who they were before, because you weren't going to forgive them. You weren't going to be compassionate to their failures and their really, really awful failings if you didn't know where they started. And I really think that's really the truth of fiction, isn't it? Is that nobody begins a bad person, or nobody begins on the wrong side of the story. Nobody begins bad. They get there slowly because of pain, because of fear, because of anger, because of loneliness. And so for all the characters, I had to really go back and go to a point long before the idea of radicalism or running away or war would have ever occurred to them. At the same time, Anita, Rose, and Layla were different to construct because they had different motivations. You know, one of the things that was important for me with the Runaways was the idea that violence isn't born out of a religion. It's not born out of a location or a geography or a people or a heritage. It can be born out of things like poverty. It can be born out of things like inequality, like a raging, furious inequality. It can be born out of heartbreak. It can be born out of a crisis of who you are, you know. And we live in these terrible times where everyone is supposed to know who they are, and it's supposed to be fully formed, and they're supposed to perform it perfectly every day without any slip. And so some of them came to me ready-made in a weird way, and some of them I had to dig. I had to excavate the boys more than the girls, more than Osama, to get there.
So on, you know, jumping off of that, you really did something very writerly in kind of in taking these realities that are sometimes hard to stomach, and really violent things that people do, and yet the reader has compassion, for the perpetrators, and I thought it was kind of masterful, and I'm wondering if you struggled with that, or if it just kind of, if you were trying to do that, or if it just kind of happened organically.
I think it happens in a way organically. I mean, you and I were talking earlier, and I confess that I always like the worst of my characters. The character that everyone else is like, God, they're awful. That's the character that I like dream about, and and I cry when I'm writing them, and I can't bear to see something bad happen to them. But I think when you become a writer, you're at the mercy of this terrible ability to look at people, and that looking is bigger than your feeling, if that makes sense. I remember seeing kids once in a park, these little kids, and the two little kids were playing, and they had like an older cousin or brother who turned up, and he was furious with them, and he'd obviously been dispatched to pick up the kids, and he came and he was so angry and he was so rough with them. I remember watching this kid, this 7-year-old, and thinking, you're going to be a terrible man when you grow up. And I don't want to think that about a child, but you can see it. And at the same time, you can feel bad for this 7-year-old, while still knowing what he's capable of. And I think when you write, you have that ability. You can see someone at their quietest, most intimate moment and see that they're afraid. And you can feel for that person at that frightened moment. And then at the same time, be unable to look away when he does something truly ghastly.
Yeah.
I think that's what novels do, isn't it? They don't have easily drawn people.
Right.
They have complicated people.
Even that, such a 7-year-old isn't necessarily going to be a bad person. I mean, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this kid really looked annoying, I have to say. He looked terrible. And I remember watching him him was like, I'm gonna stop. Like a parent's gonna say, come on, They didn't, and I could see he was furious. Like he had a fury in his eyes. And at the same time, you couldn't want to hug him because he's 7, But you see it, and I think that's the thing that when I read novels, I'm interested in. I want to see both those moments. I want to see the lonely kid, but who's going to turn out to be terrible.
Yeah, I'm having some fury right now with these dogs.
Well, your doggy was sitting so cutely and cuddling you while I was reading.
They were, well, yeah, right, but because when they could have been doing they're just making this noise when they need to be quiet. It's like they know.
They know.
So we're almost out of time, and we need to take some questions from the audience. But I wanted to ask you, something occurred to me while you were talking. I imagine being a Pakistani writer, doing a lot of speaking in the West. Do you ever feel like your art sort of gets the short end of the stick when it comes to just book discussions, and the focus is more on the politics? I mean, I find that as a Palestinian writer, and yes, I mean, politics is sort of inseparable from our lives in a lot of ways, but yes, but this is art. We're making there's something else to discuss. So yeah,
it happens all the time. And I partly think it's my fault because I keep choosing topics that are political. And you can easily talk about the Runaways without talking about fiction. You can just talk about these other concepts like, the state of Iraq, or, fundamentalism, or whatever else. So I feel like partially that's my fault because I sort of put myself in that position to begin with. and then imagine I'll be allowed to talk about character and plot. But I do think that in the West, especially, there's such a myopic view of what exists outside its borders.
Yeah.
That they're so amazed to begin with that you can speak English, you know? Like they're just excited about that, you know, and then you have to be like, well, yeah, we speak English, you know, and they'll be like, oh, but like, are you allowed to be a writer in your country? And then you have to, you know, you have to do that. And it's, I really wish it had.
Are you threatened in your country, and do you have to wear something different? And
And I remember being in college and like traveling abroad and having to answer these questions, and that was 20 years ago. And I really thought it would change, and it doesn't. And I think the difference is, at least in Asia, we don't have the luxury to be blind to the rest of the world. We are at the mercy of the rest of the world, you know. And I don't just mean politics, I mean like climate change, you know. We are not the big polluters of the world, but we we bear the brunt of that pollution. So we don't have the luxury to pretend we don't know what's happening in the world. We have to know. Whereas if you're sitting in the West, you know, really, what do you care about some country in a place you've never heard of? You don't have to know. And so it is a struggle, but I hope at least the point of having the conversation is a beginning.
yeah.
And maybe you have to start at the politics and then you reach the art.
So I think we have some questions from the audience. This is from Ibs. Congrats on your book, Fatima. My question is, you mentioned Mahmoud Darwish's poem at the start of your book. Every time I read the poem, it gives me the chills. But is there any significance to why you put this in The Runaway?
I love Mahmoud Darwish, and just like you, it gives me the chills to read that poem. And I didn't have it in the beginning when I was writing, but there was a point where the boys are in the desert, and Sonny, who really doesn't come from a world where he's used to weapons or guns or fighting, takes to it. You know, he has a kind of natural confidence and charisma and force. And Monty, the other boy, who comes from a part of the world where you do see guns often, is completely petrified and doesn't know what to do with them. And I had this scene in there where Sonny's talking to his Kalashnikov, and he's kind of cooing at it and the way you would to a dog, you know, or like you pretty thing, like things like that. And as I was writing it, I thought, well, you have to give it a name. And I thought, oh, Rita. And I thought of the poem. And I went back and read the poem, and it really made my skin sort of stand up when I read it. And I thought, this is the epigraph of the book. Thank you for that question. I haven't been asked that.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when I saw Mahmoud Darwish make a cameo there.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from Zahur. Are there any other authors or books you would recommend that deal with the radicalization of young people?
Yes, there's some great books. There's a book called Ours Are the Streets by Sanjeev Sahota. That's a really sort of stunning book. There is, well, you know, and also Sanjeev Sahota also wrote The Year of the Runaways, which is not about radicalism as such, but it is about young people at the mercy of the world. But Ours Are the Streets is about radicalism, and it's very good. Bel Canto by Anne Patchett is a strangely good book, because on the surface it's about an embassy that gets taken hostage, but it's about these sort of diplomats and, you know, businessmen who are taken hostage, and these young guerrillas who are taking them hostage, and it's quite beautifully done, the moving between these two worlds. I think, Susie, your book is a good book to talk about how people fight, how people resist, and how the world draws you in. I mean, you don't have the choice to say, oh, well, you know, I'm not political, I can't really. I think that's another one. When I read it, I thought a lot about Layla when I read Against the Loveless World, and how women are appearing in these novels now, which I'm excited about. Those are the ones off the top of my head that I would recommend, that I can wholeheartedly recommend.
Okay. So, and thank you for that shout out for the second time.
No, it's worth shouting out even a third time.
Is a proper sister on top of everything else. She really is. So this is from Silam. I love both of your novels so much. Are there any other authors you would recommend that are telling stories of East Asian or Middle Eastern women, that crash of East meets West? I'm already a huge fan of Kamala Shamsi. I mean, this kind of already goes with your previous answer, but if you want to expand on that.
I mean, you read The Sympathizer recently, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And
That's great.
The Sympathizer is great. I think there is something exciting happening now, which is that, before, like 10 years ago, it would be like one novel by someone who's not white or not Western, and it would be like, oh, how shocking. And that it's a shame that there aren't more today. And I hope that will change. But I think it's not possible to hold it back anymore. Oh, another book that's very good is Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai. I think and it's funny. It's a very funny, beautifully written story, but it has sort of elements in it. I recommend that.
You're right about I have noticed even Palestinian writers, there's a whole generation of new writers that just didn't exist 10, 15 years ago, and it's been really exciting.
And they were always there. Oh, another one, Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, who's a Palestinian novelist. She's brilliant, and she's written this novel which is it's like 112 pages, but like every page is like a charge, it's
Adani is really talented. Yeah. So, but even though there are, that's the whiner.
I can hear it howling.
So annoying. It's my daughter's dog. Anyway, there's still this thing where I do you feel like we're tokenized to some extent, and that the real serious consideration, the major book, paper of record kind of reviews go to white people writing about us?
Yeah, I think there's no question that the big advances go towards like the white guy that writes about Iraq rather than the Iraqi who's writing about Iraq. The big bookstores will have the window for, the white woman writing about, an Asian woman. And, they'll make the book club picks and they'll do all that. And I don't even know how to justify it because it's just silly, is what it is. And I think that in the world of stories, there is enough space for everyone's stories. So I don't mean to say, don't read those stories, only read these stories, but there should be space for the other stories too. And the book world is as capitalistic and as corporate and as commercial as any other world. And so it's always going to prize profit over anything else. But I think that's what's so good about things like today, is that one of the benefits is now that there will be these alternate spaces of people speaking, and you can access them. And then it's really up to you. You have to look for it. It's not going to be handed down. Even if you go to a bookstore in Karachi, it's not like all the bookshelves are like Pakistani writers. They've got, whoever is the big writer that year on the shelf too, because they think that's what they're supposed to read. And it's just that it's an effort to share books that you think tell hidden stories and to make sure that more people know about them.
So this question is from Rabia. When researching and watching the propaganda, how do you balance the very human faces shown in the AMA threads? I don't know what that.
Don't ask me anything.
Oh. I think I just showed my age. Threads with the violence that would be potentially enacted.
Well, it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy at all, because the violence is really kind of spectacularly done, you know, with a lot of bravado, with, you know, if you think of the early videos, like around 2002, you remember the orange jumpsuit videos where they would do those beheadings, and it's like a scratchy camera and it's kind of tilting, and there's a plastic chair and a grainy person. It's not like that anymore. It's like filmed in HD. There's like a soundtrack that sort of crescendos, you know, there's drone footage. So it does, in a weird way, feel like you're watching a movie.
Wow.
And they know that. I mean, I think they do it to make you feel like, wow, look how, there's not some silly operation of boys blowing things up, you know, there's fighters. But I think the effect is that you watch it with the cold distance that you watch a Tom Cruise movie. You know, you don't believe it. It's kind of icky. And the human threads, I mean, there were points where I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry or to be saddened by the delusion. You know, there were these women who would go out to join, if not the fighters, they would go to sort of just be there, to be a part of the movement or the caliphate or whatever. And they would write these blogs about marriage. And they're writing about people they've met yesterday, saying, this is the mate that God has sent for me. I feel so blessed to be in my true place with my true purpose. And then they're writing about being widowed at 21. And you do, you know, it makes you stop. You can't but feel sad for not just what these people are living through, but also the delusion that they need to maintain to keep living through that. So it was a balance, you know, but I think it tests you. It tests your compassionate or empathetic abilities. And I know empathy is a big word today, but really the test of empathy is you don't practice empathy on people who are easy to like. You know, you have to practice it on the worst sorts of people.
Yeah.
You know? So,
So having the name Fatima Bhutto
mhm.
and carrying around, maybe I'm guessing, a laptop with these videos. You have to go through airports with this stuff, were you?
Yeah, I did. You know, in the beginning, Susie, when I was, because I would have like, I don't know if you were like this, but you know, when you were searching something, you just have like 3,000 tabs open.
Yes. And
you know, you can't possibly write everything down at once. So you save some open. And there were years, 2014, 15, I went to an airport and I would just think, oh God, like I didn't close these tabs. What do I say? Like if they ask me, what's this? I can't be like, oh, I'm writing a book. You know, then who's going to believe that? Luckily, it never happened. It never happened, but I'll tell you a funny story. Well, funny. After the Runaways came out in England, I traveled to America. And it was the first time I'd been in like 3 or 4 years or something. And I go through customs and hand over my passport. It's a Pakistani passport. And the customs guy says, what do you do? And I said, I'm a writer. And usually when you do that, they'll say, oh, what do you write? You know, or like, oh, have I read anything? And this guy didn't say any of that. He just looked at me and he said, do your books, what did he say? Do your books condone violence?
Oh my God. Wow.
You know, and I was shocked and I was really kind of offended. And I said, no, of course not. And when I told friends this story later, they said, you should be really happy he didn't ask you what your last book was about. Because that would have been difficult to explain, you know. I don't think the Runaways condones violence at all. I think it's very critical of violence. But in order to know...
What would have happened if you'd have just said, yeah, so?
Well, I think I would have been put on the plane back home if I said, yeah, so that would have been the end of my trip.
Yeah, but although that's another discussion. Some violence is allowed, some violence isn't, right? Like,
you know, this is the thing. This is with you can't have a nuanced conversation like in a tweet, you know. You can't have it at an airport check-in. You need to have space and time and care to have those conversations. And so, yeah, carrying a laptop around,
right?
Exactly, through novels.
Okay, so I think we have time maybe for one or two last questions. This is a question from Alan, and I want to know the answer to this. Was there anything cut from the novel you wish you hadn't? What was it and why?
There was a lot cut from the novel, Alan. I did have, in its early scenes, there was like fighting. I had a good 30, 40 pages of them reaching a destination and there being fighting. That all got cut. I don't regret that. I think that was the right choice. I'm proud to say that when I was writing The Runaways in 2014, I had a scene where one of the characters tweets President Donald Trump. And friends who read my book and an early editor in 2014 said, "Don't be ridiculous. He's never going to be president." And I said, well, you know.
Yeah.
So I had a whole bunch of internet scenes. So I had like Twitter threads. I wrote an entire TED talk for one of the characters,
Oh, wow.
which was a little bit too like satirical. So that did get cut, and I do regret that. I mean, I do miss the Twitter threads and the TED talk. But you know,
Why
yeah.
did you cut him out? Was it just?
Well, the advice that I was given was that it was too funny, and this is not the time and place to be funny. So a lot of my jokes were cut. I mean, I kept a few. I managed to hide them. I did also, you know, I had for Sunny's character, I had a lot of Portsmouth slang, and I had a lot of Portsmouth stuff, and then I cut that because it seemed a bit too, like, I'm not from Portsmouth, so it's never going to sound natural in my voice. So I just didn't feel comfortable with it, so I cut all that.
The funny stuff though, I mean, I have to say, like, I'm so not funny, and when I manage to get some jokes, that's definitely not getting cut. So
I love to keep jokes in.
So this is from Shayna, and it appears to be cut off. Sabir, you can message me if not, but it says, Susan mentioned the Western gaze and asked, how do you escape slipping into Orientalist tropes? I'm not sure if I guess maybe she just wanted you to expand on that, but that's how.
Well, I mean, I think the Western gaze is, of course, it's a suffocating gaze because it's the one we live in. But at the same time, it's not how we see things. So the escape is natural. I think it is natural. I think sometimes we slip into this thing of trying to explain things because we think we're talking to people who won't understand. And when I was writing my first novel, I remember giving the book to a writer friend of mine who I really trust. And he just said to me very simply, don't explain this stuff. If they don't know it, they can look it up. And I thought, that's a reminder I tell myself. So if I'm writing something and I've explained what something is, it's a job I have to be conscious of. I have to then say, why are you explaining it? They can look it up. You know, you're not a dictionary. You don't have to translate everything. And actually that gives you so much more freedom to just relay things as they are for you, rather than as you perceive someone else to perceive them.
So Sabir here's the end of that question. It said, what gaze do you bring to your work, Fatima and Susan? This is your hour.
I think for me, it's a very intimate gaze. It's always going to be what I'm feeling. I don't know about you, Susie.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I have to say, I don't really, when I write, I really try to just keep a 100% loyalty to the characters, to just telling their story honestly and truthfully, and with compassion and truth.
But aren't you in the character somewhere, or no? You don't think that?
Am I in the characters? I inevitably do end up. I don't mean to put myself in there, but I think I do. You know, when it's done, I don't know. I mean, do you?
I don't mean for them to be ciphers of me, but I find, especially if I'm writing something difficult, that I'm always going to be relying on something I know or felt or thought.
I think that has to be true of all, if not most, I'm guessing all writers, because I think what comes across as most authentic is what we do really know, and not just know intellectually, I mean, know viscerally.
Yeah.
And that can only come from having felt the pain of it or the joy of it. And
Yeah, I agree.
so there's one last question here. It looks like from Samad. What country culture influenced your writings the most? Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and how each did?
I think it would be Pakistan. I think it would be Pakistan because when I think, I'm always thinking there first. I'm always thinking there first because it's the country that really forced my eyes open. You know, I was younger when I was in the other countries, and I was more innocent in the other countries because I was younger. But Pakistan is a country for me that brings you so much closer to other people. I mean, you can't silo yourself off in Pakistan. You know, it's not possible, and you are intimately positioned against people's joy and their sorrow and their pain, whether you live it with them or you don't live it with them. You can't look away from it. And so it's really Pakistan that taught me to look in the way that I look. It taught me to think in the way I think. And it really forced me to always, I guess, not just look and think outside myself, but to try and feel. Because, you know, you have examples in Pakistan of what happens if you don't feel, if you close yourself off from feeling what someone else might go through, and it's too cold a thing to consider. So I would say Pakistan the most, yeah.
So on that note, I think we have run out of time. I really just want.
Oh, you went mute.
Oh, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I really just want to reiterate how much I love this book. I would encourage everyone listening to get this book, to tell your friends about it. It's, you know, I haven't really read anything else that touches on this particular subject. And I didn't realize how important a subject it was until I read your book. And aside from the important subject, it is beautifully, beautifully written. I was thinking all along that, wow, you're a natural writer. I mean, I don't know if you work at it or hard at it, or if you have to rewrite a lot like I do. But the prose was really, really beautiful. There are a lot of, I mean, it's a hard book to read in some places, but there's some moments that are truly tender and beautiful. The friendships, the human, the internal drama in this book is really wonderful. So thank you for that gift, Fatima. And it was such a joy to connect with you. I hope we get to see each other in real life again.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you for doing the conversation. I know you have so much to do with your book coming out next week. So thank you for taking the time. It's always wonderful to speak to you. Thank you to Sabir and the Strand for hosting us. The Strand is where I launched my last book when we could travel. And thank you all for choosing to spend your evening or your night or wherever you are with us. And thank you for all your questions. They were really lovely.